Welcome to the Tomorrow Money Show. I am your host, Mnyaradzi Togarepi. Happy New Year. This is my first episode this year. And if this is your first time here, please welcome. On this podcast, we talk about the future of money, we talk about Bitcoin, and we talk about crypto. What it all means for us in Zimbabwe, not in Silicon Valley, not in Wall Street, but right here at home. Today's episode is a special one. I am happy to be doing this episode because for the first time in a long time, I can say this clearly and confidently. Zimbabwe has taken a meaningful step toward regulatory clarity for crypto. I am talking about actual legislation signed into law that tells us how the government sees crypto, how it wants to regulate it, and what people building or using Bitcoin need to do to stay compliant. This comes through the Finance Act of 2025, which amends both the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act and the Securities and Exchange Act to formally recognize and regulate virtual assets. It is a pretty big law covering a lot of things, but today I just want to focus on what this new legal framework means for Bitcoin and other pure cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, Solana, or Ripple. First things first, Bitcoin is now explicitly recognized in law. This is a big deal. For the first time, Zimbabwean law now defines something called a virtual asset. And the definition is broad enough to clearly include Bitcoin. A virtual asset is defined as a digital representation of value that can be traded or transferred digitally and used for payment or investment purposes, excluding fiat currency and traditional securities. That description fits Bitcoin almost perfectly. This means Bitcoin is no longer operating in a legal gray zone. It is recognized, defined, and regulated in Zimbabwe. That alone is a positive development. Regulation does not automatically mean restriction, right? In many cases, it is what allows an industry to grow. Secondly, who is actually being regulated? The service providers, not the users. The Finance Act of 2025 does not criminalize owning Bitcoin. It does not ban peer-to-peer usage. It does not say you need to have a license to hold Bitcoin or transact in Bitcoin personally. Instead, the law focuses on virtual asset service providers, often called VASPs. These include businesses that exchange Bitcoin for fiat currency, or exchange Bitcoin for other crypto assets, or transfer Bitcoin on behalf of others, or safeguard or custody Bitcoin, or provide financial services related to the sale or issuance of virtual assets. In simple terms, if you are running a Bitcoin business, especially one that touches customer funds, you are now treated like a financial institution for compliance purposes. If you are just a user, a saver, or someone transacting peer-to-peer, the law does not target you directly. Now, if you are a business involved in crypto, there are two layers of licensing you must understand. Layer 1 comes from the Money Laundering and Proceeds of Crime Act. Any Bitcoin service provider operating in or from Zimbabwe must register with the Financial Intelligence Unit and comply with AML, CFT, and risk-based compliance obligations. Layer number 2 comes from the Securities and Exchange Act, which introduces a formal licensing regime for virtual asset service providers. If your Bitcoin business involves exchanges, payment services, or operating a platform, you must apply for a VASP license from the Securities and Exchange Commission of Zimbabwe. In the meantime, however, if you're already operating legally before the Finance Act came into force on 1 January, you are allowed to continue operating until 30 April 2026. But after that, you must be registered and licensed. So what does this compliance mean in practice? At a high level, Bitcoin businesses should be preparing for the following. First, know your customer. KYC procedures. You need to know who your customers are, especially if you are exchanging Bitcoin for fiat or custodying funds. Second, risk-based AML controls. The law explicitly requires institutions to assess their money laundering and financing risk and apply strong controls where risks are high. Third, local substance. The Act requires that virtual asset businesses be directed and managed from Zimbabwe with real decision making happening locally, not just a shell entity. Fourth, fit and proper management. Licensing considers things like integrity, governance standards, experience, and reputation of those running the business. Bitcoin is often treated differently from other crypto assets globally, and Zimbabwe's framework quietly reflects that reality. Bitcoin is no issuer, is not an investment contract, is not a security, is not a tokenized asset. So Bitcoin itself is not being licensed. Instead, the law regulates the on-ramps, off-ramps, custodians, and intermediaries around Bitcoin. And let's zoom out for a moment. Bitcoin solves real problems here in Zimbabwe. And by introducing regulatory clarity, now builders can invest with more confidence, and banks now have a clearer rules for engagement. International partners know the compliance expectations, and innovation can now move from underground to above board. This framework opens the door for Bitcoin-based remittances, merchant payment adoption, regulated custodial services, and infrastructure for DeFi, prediction markets, and tokenization, which we will cover in future episodes. I'm obviously happy about this development. This is the Tomorrow Money Show. Happy New Year.